Things remain peaceful for now, but as we've seen in the past, these things can change very quickly, as my next guest knows very well. Anthony Regan is a constitutional lawyer from the ANU College of Asia and the Pacific. He spent 17 years on the ground in Papua New Guinea, living and working there. Anthony, thanks for joining us today. What's the latest information you have from your contacts on the ground there?
Much as you reported, from what I'm hearing, there's no serious moves to sack the Governor-General, which would be a very difficult thing to do because it involves the Parliament's recommendation going to the Queen, and it would be up to the Queen, who's the head of state, to remove the Governor-General. So that would be hard to do, so I doubt that they're going to try and do that.
So what it sounds like that this swearing-in of Somare will stick?
A bit unclear, because the O'Neill side of things have a reasonably strong argument in their favour, which has not been widely covered in the media. I think the situation's so fast-moving that people are losing track of things. Why they've got a strong position is that on Monday, Parliament, with a majority of well over half, passed a law with retrospective effect, going back to January of this year, which they're allowed to do, fixing up the defects or purporting, if you like, to fix up the defects in the appointment of O'Neill back in August. So in other words, they patched up what the Supreme Court said was done wrongly. So there is a valid law in place until the Supreme Court rules that it's unconstitutional. Under the PNG system, the Parliament laws are supreme unless the Supreme Court rules that they're invalid. So to really give solid support to the Somare position, ideally they should have gone straight back to court on Monday with a challenge to that legislation. And it's quite possible, I think, for the O'Neill faction now to go to court and say, well, Parliament has spoken, rule in our favour and say that we're the correct government. Because the Governor-General, it could be argued, didn't have the authority to rule on this. The Governor-General's job is to do what he's told in the PNG system. He's got no reserve powers. Just
to take you back a bit, why was Somare removed in the first place? And was that process by the courts, in your view, legitimate, and also the overturning of that decision this week?
The removal of Somare was because he was very ill and in hospital in Singapore, in a coma for an extended period because of a series of 3 heart operations that he had. And it was looking unlikely back in July, August, that he would ever be well enough to come back. And of course, PNG politics is about, like all politics, control of resources and so on. So there's an election coming up next year, so it looked like this was a chance for those in opposition to get control of the government. What they did to remove him was not strictly in accordance with the Constitution, and the ruling by the Supreme Court, in my view, is a solid ruling, although I haven't read the reasons, but there was clearly arguments that were available to the court. What's been done by the Parliament on Monday has yet to be tested. On the face of it, it's valid legislation. It's unprecedented legislation to go back and say, well, we didn't actually do this in August, but we're now making it legal. Even though we didn't do it, this is now providing us with the legal grounds for doing what we did retrospectively. Now, that's unprecedented. Whether that would stand up in an examination by the courts, we don't know.
Now, an important question, I don't know whether it will come to this, but who is in control of the military at the moment, and do you think that could play a part?
One of the most dangerous things about the current situation is that the police force appears to have split. A dissident policeman who had a grievance against the police commissioner appointed by the O'Neill government has been appointed by Somare in advance of the swearing-in of the cabinet as the police commissioner. And different factions of the police are supporting, apparently, one side and the other. That creates grave difficulties. There would be a temptation, you'd imagine, for the army to think that there may be a role for them in resolving that situation. That's the kind of thing that happens sometimes. So far, there's no indication that that's happening in PNG. The army, from what I've been told, is under lockdown. Everything possible is being done to make sure that there is no move by the army. And that's very heartening news, obviously.
What can or should Australia do in this situation?
Australia's got very limited capacity. PNG's a large country, a relatively wealthy country despite its problems. It's it's about 7 million people with extensive and rapidly growing wealth. Australia's was a colonial power more than 35 years ago. It's got powers of persuasion. It's got no power to intervene. All it can do is do its best to encourage all sides to exercise restraint.
But if things do get violent, if things do really collapse, is that at a point that Australia may step in vis-a-vis East Timor?
I would think it would be very unlikely that Australia would step in. It would be far, far more difficult to step in Papua New Guinea than in East Timor.
Why is that?
It's a very large country, it's very diverse, it's a country of over 800 languages with an incredibly spread population. The highlands of Papua New Guinea now are heavily armed. Other parts of the country are heavily armed. Going into a situation, if the police are backing different sides, armed groups are backing different sides, it would be a very, very fraught situation.
If I could get you to take off your constitutional lawyer hat and put on your sort of crystal ball hat in terms of not what should happen but what will happen, will O'Neill or Somare come out on top here?
I don't know who'll come out on top. I will say, though, and this is an important caveat to everything I said about the dangers, PNG has shown incredible resilience over the years. There's always been an ability of people to step back from the brink. In 1997, you'll remember the Sandline mercenaries were in and the army was split. And there were people of goodwill who stepped in, worked with everybody and helped to resolve the situation. I would predict that that's the most likely outcome here, despite all the risks. I know that there's people in the churches, in NGOs, academics, a whole range of people now working with both sides. There's lots of very well-intentioned, sane people on both sides who'll be doing their best to defuse the situation. So I think the most likely outcome is that PNG will step back from the brink and show the resilience that system there has shown in the past.
Well, let's hope that that's the way it unfolds. Anthony Regan, thank you very much for your insights and your thoughts. Fascinating stuff.